Welcome to Nebraska Farmcast, a production of the Center for Agricultural Profitability at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. I'm Ryan Evans, and today I'm glad to be joined by Tim Meyer, an associate professor of practice in the Department of Agricultural Economics here at UNL. He recently wrote an article for the Ag Econ department's Cornhusker Economics series, exploring the relationship between cash flow, profitability, and solvency in farm management. So we'll break down why those matter, how they interact, and what farmers and ranchers should consider when making big financial decisions like buying land or managing debt. We won't be diving into all the specific numbers from Tim's case studies that he presents, but we encourage you to check out the article linked in the podcast notes wherever you're listening to this and on our Center for Ag Profitability website at cap.unl.edu. Anyway, I'm glad he's here to discuss the big picture takeaways that producers can apply to their own operations. So Tim, thanks for joining me.
It's great to be here, Ryan.
So you start the article by saying you like accounting because the rules and structures that it provides are useful. So how does that mindset just help you when you're here at UNL teaching undergraduate farm and ranch management?
You know, this example that I have really kind of starts off with a basic problem that the textbook poses to students. That is, you buy inputs in one year, you produce in the next year, you sell some of your output that year, and you sell the rest of it the next year. And you might not even sell it, you might even use it yourself. And how do we evaluate profitability when we have 3 different calendar years and we have some cash sales and we have really purchases of product ourselves? We might feed it to livestock if we're talking about corn. So that's the first place where we see that accrual accounting helps us really define profit for one enterprise like corn in this pretty realistic scenario. So the example that we have today, though, is bigger. It's about investment analysis and financial feasibility of making decisions about expanding operations and how that affects both profitability, solvency, and cash flow.
Yeah, and before we get into the examples and go further, could you just quickly explain the difference between accrual accounting and cash accounting?
Absolutely. So you could say that there's one rule for both. If it's cash accounting, we're going to record it if cash is exchanged. So an example would be we sell grain for cash. We're going to write that down. It happened. It's pretty obvious. But if we purchase fuel on account, well, we didn't pay any cash yet. And we may be using that fuel to dry grain that has moisture contents that are too high in 2024, and we pay the bill in 2025. So the expense happens in 24, but we pay it in 25. Accrual accounting says, no, cash is nice, and we're going to pay attention to that. But our one rule is to record economic events. If something happens, there is a way to record that. And in the fuel drying example, it would be accounts payable. We'd recognize the expense right away and show that we owe somebody some money.
Great. And as you've kind of mentioned here, one of the big ideas in your article is that cash flow or liquidity and profitability are not the same thing. So can you just explain why that distinction is so important for farm and ranch operators?
Well, I think it's important because our overall goal is farm value and long-term profitability. And sometimes we have goals of passing farms to generations beneath us. But we have a short-term goal of paying our bills. So we have 2 competing goals, and one of them is cash flow. I got to be able to pay my bills maybe today, but a longer-term goal of I want to increase the value of the farm business. And sometimes those things work against each other.
And you outlined some different scenarios where a farm could be profitable on paper, but still struggle with cash flow. So how can producers assess their own financial position to avoid getting caught in a liquidity trap?
A big thing is just knowing what you want to do in advance. So if you read the article, you'll see that there are some giant assumptions that are made, and that's to really highlight what's happening and to make this understandable to students. But if this is a matter of we want to expand our farm, we want to buy land, we have to plan ahead of time, because even at lower levels of financing like 60%, it's likely in higher interest rate environments that these projects are not going to cash flow. So we have to think about expanding operations when we have other operations that can backfill that lack of liquidity for our new investments.
And speaking of those financing decisions, you talk about the difference between self-financing and borrowing. What else should producers consider when they're deciding how to fund a land purchase or another major investment?
Well, the back end of the article talks about opportunity cost. Where are we taking self-financed funds from? Are they available? Might be the first place that we need to think about. But as I hinted earlier, interest rates are now at what I would call a normal level. Neither one of us are really old enough to remember normal or high interest rates. When we were young, we had normal interest rates, but we don't remember truly high interest rates. So these interest rates that we're borrowing money at now, we have to be much more careful about identifying the best use of those borrowed funds. So I think that actually is going to reward our operators that are the best decision makers, and having a good mind for financial analysis and a framework to help us through some of these really not simple problems is going to be very useful.
And in your article, you address opportunity costs using an example of investing in land versus the stock market. So how can farmers and ranchers account for opportunity costs? Are there other ways in their decision making?
Well, that might be the one part of the article that causes most people to get their dander up a little bit, because investing in the stock market might be an inappropriate opportunity cost. Because if you really have no interest in investing in a financial asset like the stock market, it's just not appropriate. A better approximation might be just land rent. How much could this land be rented for if I were choosing not to operate myself? So there has to be an appropriate opportunity cost that is chosen. The stock market is a little bit flashier to point out that, we have millions of dollars of assets under control. We should make a lot of money. I'm not very shy about telling my students that if they don't have a goal for their home, farm, or ranch, I'll give them one. And it's to make a lot of money so that they have to donate it back to my department. And it's, we laugh about it, but there's a lot of risk. There's a lot of hard work. There's a lot of skill. And the economy is supposed to reward people that are taking on those risks and producing in the highest and best way possible.
And can you just, in a nutshell, kind of explain for producers who are looking to improve their financial management, some practical steps they can take to better track and understand all three of these aspects in cash flow, profitability, and solvency?
Well, first of all, write everything down. It is a little bit surprising how sometimes we don't know what we have. So that's important. To be able to understand the difference in profitability in our different enterprises, not just what we're producing, but also where we're producing. So if we have owned ground, how does that cash flow and profit compared to rented ground? And being able to discern the difference between those two. That would certainly be a place that people can start.
And then just to wrap it up, if you could just explain your article, you've titled it Reconciling the Paradox of Positive Profit and Negative Cash Flow. So how, again, going back to accrual accounting, how does that help reconcile both of those?
Well, and here you do have to read the article. The example in the article, the producer has a giant pile of money. And when he takes on a new quarter section of ground, it doesn't cash flow when he's borrowing the money. And we can see his cash balance going down. But the liquidated value of his farm, which would mean I sell all the assets and pay off all the debt, actually goes up because the operations on the new quarter section of ground are profitable. And owner's equity reflects that, but the cash balance doesn't. If you don't have a giant pile of money, you have to be able to realize that you are growing the value of the farm business while your cash balance is going down. Maybe a better way to think about it would be an operator that is gifted a new equipment line, gifted nice farmland, but then does a poor job operating. They make poor decisions that just from a production standpoint are not necessarily doing a great job, but they're okay. That's going to cash flow. because they own all of their equipment, they own all of their land, they don't have any interest expense. They're going to have money left over at the end of the year. But when that equipment needs to be replaced, they might be in a world of hurt. So that highlights the paradox in the other way, where the operator might be actually producing at a loss, but their cash flow is positive. So that in the short run, cash flow and profit are not the same thing. Over a longer period of time, and it doesn't have to be that long, they do reconcile. We just don't want operators to have bad surprises.
Right, well, great. That's Tim Meyer, Associate Professor of Practice here in the Department of Agricultural Economics at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. Definitely encourage listeners to check out Professor Meyer's article in the notes to this podcast. It's linked, and again, on our website at cap.unl.edu. You've got some great examples of balance sheets and really walks through them nicely to help you understand the concepts of what we've been discussing here on this episode. So, Tim, thanks for your time.
You bet. Thanks, Ryan.
Nebraska Farmcast is a production of the Center for Agricultural Profitability at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. For the latest research-based information and education resources to manage your farm or ranch operation, visit our website at cap.unl.edu. That's cap.unl.edu.